You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to my first ever show dedicated solely to fantasy sports here on the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and this is going to be dedicated solely to the incoming rookies. Not going to talk about any veterans. I'm just going to talk about the rookies and how I think they're going to do from a fantasy football perspective. There are some very talented players that got drafted into bad situations, and there are some players that aren't as talented that got drafted into really good situations. So I'm going to break it all down for you. Here's how I'm going to do this. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I really think this is the best way to do it. There's a website that I use a lot called fantasypros.com. And what they've done is they have published a list of their fantasy football rookie rankings. And it goes all the way from 1 to 107. Now, this is the consensus of 30 experts. With fantasy sports, it is important to not take one opinion as gospel. There is logic to wisdom of the crowd when it comes to fantasy sports. You have to crowdsource. If you're looking for a streamer, something that I use a lot is Yahoo Sports' transaction trends, where you can see who the most popular ads and drops are. If 200,000 people are dropping someone or 100,000 people are adding someone, well, they may know something you don't. There is logic to wisdom of the crowd. So, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to give my opinion on their top 20. At the end, I'll give you some guys who they didn't mention who I think can be good players. What's also important to keep in mind is who I'm recommending this for. Not everyone is going to be for your standard fantasy football league. Some people are going to be just for deep dynasty leagues, or deep season-long leagues, or standard dynasty leagues. There are a million different combinations. What's also important to keep in mind is this can change. It's May 1st right now. We still have training camp to get through, assuming there is a training camp, and the preseason, assuming there is a preseason. So these recommendations can change. Basically, the main reason I'm doing this is to put guys on your radar who may not be on your radar. And I want you to say to yourself, you know what? If the draft breaks a certain way, I'm gonna target these guys. I'm gonna keep an eye on them in the lead up to my draft, and we'll see what happens. So without further ado, their number one player is Jonathan Taylor, a running back for the Colts. I would not have him at number one. He wouldn't even make my top 3. maybe not even top 5, but Taylor will have a good role as Marlon Mack's backup. I'd be surprised if he supplanted Mack. I like Mack a lot. Really talented player. It made sense for the Colts to bring in a backup. Nyheim Hines isn't that good. So, Taylor will get his. He'll be a good player when on the field. But I'd hesitate to take him as anything more than a bench player in a deep league. Number 2 is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You should take him as your RB2. He'll be that good. It doesn't matter what the league is. He will have a featured role in the Chiefs' offense. This is something that teams with great quarterbacks so often overlook. The running game. Peyton Manning, for a lot of his time with the Colts, didn't have a great running game. Yes, he had Edgar and James was great. But Joseph Adai was just good, bordering on very good. And Tom Brady never had a great running back. With Clyde Edwards-Helaire on the Chiefs, the sky's the limit for him. He could be 1,000-yard back. If given the opportunity. He really could. And he'll be a great pass catcher. In PPR leagues, he'll be insane. Pick up Clyde Edwards-Helaire if you can. I'm sure that in my Dynasty League, he will be the first overall pick in the draft. DeAndre Swift is next. I'd hesitate to take him as anything more than a bench player in a deep league. The Lions already have Kerryon Johnson. Yeah, Swift is going to push Johnson. And if the Lions really decide to blow things up, maybe they give Swift a more prominent role. And make no mistake about it, that's possible. Trade rumors have surrounded Matthew Stafford for a while. But I don't see Swift as being the third best rookie in fantasy football this year. If given the opportunity, he'll be great. I thought he was the best running back in this draft. I just don't see him supplanting Kerryon Johnson. J.K. Dobbins is next, and I don't see how he's fourth. You have Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards. I mean, when Nick put Jonathan Taylor on the Ravens, I thought he was insane. They didn't have any room for Taylor. They still didn't have room for a running back the day of the draft. I don't understand why they took a running back that high. I like J.K. Dobbins a lot, but I just don't see the fit. From a fantasy perspective, I would avoid him like the plague. We're getting off running backs now to Jerry Jeudy. Take this guy as your flex. Maybe even wide receiver 3. He will be that good playing next to Courtland Sutton. With Phillip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon to go along with Sutton and Jeudy, and Noah Fant too, and Albert Okwuegbunam, the sky's the limit for Drew Lock. I think Jeudy is going to have a really, really good season for the Broncos. I've even heard some people say that that was the best fit that any team had in the draft. Like, that was the perfect fit for the perfect player. And you know what? I'd have a hard time disagreeing with him. Jerry Jeudy is going to have a great year. I don't think there's a question about that. CeeDee Lamb is next up. Look, he'll get his. I like Lamb a lot. If you want to take him as a bench player in your standard league or your deep league, I don't mind that. I'm just a little concerned as to how much of an opportunity he's going to have playing next to Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. And he'll also have Ezekiel Elliott and Blake Jarwin to deal with. Lamb could get an opportunity. Don't take him as a flex player. Don't take him as a wide receiver 3. You can take him as your bench wide receiver. I don't mind that. But don't expect too much from him right away. I'd be hesitant to take him and expect him to do a lot. Moving on now to Cam Akers. And this guy should be a lot higher than 7. Cam Akers has the opportunity to start for the Rams, to take over for Todd Gurley. He's better than Malcolm Brown. He's better than Darrell Henderson. If Akers starts all 16 games, playing behind that offensive line, he could be a 1,000-yard back. He could be an RB2 right away. The one thing I'll say is, wait to make sure he's going to be the starter. If he's the backup, take him as a handcuff back. I don't mind that. But RB2, you have to wait until he's the starter. Having said that, though, if you're in a dynasty league, have him circled on your board. Moving on now to Justin Jefferson. We're going to go on a big run of wide receivers here. Jefferson landed in the perfect spot. I love the idea of him playing next to Adam Thielen. He's going to slide into the Stephon Diggs role seamlessly. There's nothing stopping him from being a 700 to 800 yard receiver his rookie year. You could take him as your wide receiver 3, and I wouldn't be upset. He has that type of ceiling. Henry Ruggs, I feel like, is being really overrated. The Raiders spent a lot of money on Tyrell Williams, and Hunter Renfrow had a good year last year. They signed Jason Witten. They still have Darren Waller. I'm just not sure if the opportunity is going to be there for Ruggs. I also thought that was a big reach. I'd hesitate to take Ruggs as anything more than a backup wide receiver in a really deep league. And the same thing goes for Jalen Reagor, who's next on the list. Reagor is a really sexy name to some people, but keep in mind they still have Alshon Jeffrey, they still have Deshaun Jackson, they traded for Marquise Goodwin. Where's the opportunity? If there are a bunch of injuries, then yeah, the opportunity is there for Reagor. But I'd hesitate to take him as anything more than a backup wide receiver in a really deep league. Denzel Mims is next up on the list, and maybe I'm being a Jet homer here, which is something that you need to be afraid of when you're drafting. I mean, I've fallen victim to this, and everyone's fallen victim to this. They fall in love with players from their favorite team. But I really think that Mims has an opportunity to be a 700-yard receiver right away. You can make the argument that he is the best wide receiver the Jets have right now. Either him or Jamison Crowder. The opportunity is there for him to contribute right away. I'm going to target Mims in my league. I'll tell you that right now. Wide receiver 3 would be pushing it. Flex, maybe as a second flex you could do it. I'd rather you do it as a backup. But in dynasty leagues, I would covet Denzel Mims. Moving on now to T. Higgins. And it's going to be interesting to see how he's used. Is Burrow going to favor an older player like Green, or is he going to look to get the other rookie involved in Higgins? I mean, I like the triumvirate of Green, Boyd, and Higgins. But it's going to be difficult for Higgins to get a lot of catches. I wouldn't take him as anything more than a backup wide receiver. You can take him in a standard league, but just take him as a backup. Michael Pittman landed in the perfect spot with the Colts. He's instantly their second best receiver. In fact, you can make the argument that he's their best receiver because T.Y. Hilton has had injury concerns. I like Hilton a lot, but he has to stay healthy. But if he can, that wide receiver duo of Hilton and Pittman is lethal. Pittman is going to get his no matter what. He's an instant 800 receiving yard threat. You can take him as your wide receiver 3, and I wouldn't be upset. As a flex player, I wouldn't be upset. I think he's going to have a huge impact on the Colts immediately. Moving on now to Keyshawn Vaughn. I really like this player. My father went to Vanderbilt, so I saw a lot of Vanderbilt last year, more than I should have. And Vaughn was always the best player on that team. Now, that's not saying a lot because Vanderbilt was a terrible team last year. It's amazing how Derek Mason is still there. But I like Vaughn. I think he landed in a really good spot in Tampa Bay. He could even push Ronald Jones for the starting spot. I'm not a big Ronald Jones fan. I don't think he's a terrible player. I just don't think he's great. And there's a part of me that thinks that Keyshawn Vaughn has a higher ceiling than Jones. Vaughn could become a very highly coveted handcuff back as we get closer to opening day. Don't take him as anything more than a backup running back in a really deep league as of right now, but if he becomes a starter, RB2 all the way. Joe Burrow is next on the list, and he's interesting. You have to take him as a backup quarterback. But there are some starting quarterbacks in fantasy football that are just riskier than others. For instance, I'm going to roll with Baker Mayfield in my Dynasty League. That's risky. Mayfield had a bad sophomore year. Now, I think he will rebound and have a great junior year, but I don't know if I want Burrow as my backup. There's a chance that he could bust. I don't think he will, but there's certainly a chance of it. If you have a guy like Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or Russell Wilson, a premier starting quarterback, go with Burrow. But if you have a lesser starter, I'd hesitate to go with Burrow. If you're one of those people who waits until the later rounds to draft a quarterback, which I don't advocate, but if you do, then you could do a lot worse than Joe Burrow. Incredibly high ceiling. Laviska Shenault Jr. is next on the list. I wouldn't touch him unless you're in a really, really deep league. I like him a lot, but he's playing behind some really talented players in Keelan Cole, Chris Conley, DJ Chark, and Dede Westbrook in no particular order. It's going to be tough for him to get reps. It's going to be tough to expect him to do a lot with Minshew as the starter. I'd avoid Shenault as anything more than a major backup if you're in a really, really deep league. Brandon Ayuk should definitely be higher than Shenault. This guy has a case for being the best wide receiver on the Niners as of right now. I mean, you can make the argument that he's better than Deebo Samuel. He's better than Kendrick Bourne. He's better than Jalen Hurd. He's better than Dante Pettis. The sky is the limit for Ayuk. I like him a lot. You could take him as your wide receiver 3 or a flex player in a standard league and I wouldn't be upset at you. He's gonna produce a lot for the Niners this year. Tua Tagovailoa, I wouldn't touch as of right now. For starters, I have no idea if he's gonna start week 1. Second up, I don't even know if he's gonna be healthy week 1. Look, I like Tua a lot. And you can make the argument that he has the highest ceiling out of any offensive player in this draft. Maybe even highest ceiling out of any player in this draft. But the only way that I would take him is in a really deep dynasty league. Maybe I'll keep Tua around all year, and then the year after, I can keep Tua around or try to flip him to a quarterback-needy team. You always got to be thinking about that stuff if you're in a dynasty league. Zach Moss I like a lot. I'm just not sure how he's going to be used in Buffalo. He could be a premier handcuff to Devin Singletary. He's better than TJ Yeldon. But I wouldn't take him as anything more than a backup in a deep league. He'll be a productive starter. I just don't know if he's going to get that opportunity right away. That's Singletary's job as of right now. Bryan Edwards is the last guy in their top 20. And I wouldn't touch him with a 60-foot pole. The Raiders took so many wide receivers. Where is Edwards going to play? Where is Edwards going to get that opportunity? I wouldn't even take him as a backup. There are better backups out there. Even if you're in a deep league, a deep dynasty league, whatever. I like Lynn Bowden more than I like Bryan Edwards. I wouldn't take him at all. Some other guys who I want to mention as players to just keep on your radar. KJ Hamler. I think he'll have an opportunity to contribute in Denver. I'm not sure how much, but the opportunity is there. Same thing with Chase Claypool. It's going to be interesting to see who starts opposite Smith-Schuster, Claypool, or James Washington. Justin Herbert. I really liked him coming out of Oregon. It's possible that he could start for the Chargers, and look, maybe he won't be great right away, but in a dynasty league, you could do a lot worse. Anthony McFarland could be a good handcuff back to James Conner. I think McFarland is better than Benny Snell. Cole Kmet could be a decent player for you. I'm just not sure how much of an opportunity he's going to get. The Bears have so many tight ends. I knew they were going to draft one. I'm just not sure where the opportunity is, if he's going to start over Jimmy Graham. I'm not crazy about drafting him. You could take him in a deep league. Tight end is a notoriously difficult fantasy position. But I wouldn't take him as anything more than a backup. Eno Benjamin could be a really good handcuff back to Kenyon Drake. And if Drake falters, watch out, because I think Benjamin could seize that job for a while. Van Jefferson has a golden opportunity to contribute for the Rams. I think he could be the slot receiver, supplanting Josh Reynolds. I like Jefferson a lot. Adam Troutman could contribute for you. I wasn't as high on him as most people were coming out of the draft, but look, if he's going to start at tight end for the Saints, you could certainly do a lot worse than having him as a backup, especially with Drew Brees. La'Mical Perine is a great handcuff back to have for Le'Veon Bell. I think Perine is going to get a lot of run for the Jets. Gase does that a lot. He drafts these running backs that no one's ever heard of, and then they shoot to the top. I think Perine could have a pretty good role for the Jets. Same thing with Joshua Kelly. If he's able to supplant Justin Jackson as Austin Eckler's backup, Kelly has a ton of talent. You could do a lot worse than him as a handcuff back. And the last two guys that I want to mention are Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene. Keep an eye out for that tight end battle for the Patriots. They still have Matt Lacoste. They still have Ryan Izzo. I think Asiasi is going to end up taking it, but just keep an eye out on that tight end battle. Alright, I think that's it. As of right now, a lot can change by the time we reach training camp and then the preseason. God only knows when that's going to be. This was a lot of fun. I like doing this. Do not take my word as gospel. Get as much advice on fantasy sports as you can. The wisdom of the crowd is paramount. Regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show to come this afternoon. Until then, I am Jacob Valk saying that if you invited the 1993 Phillies over for dinner, you need to cover your furniture with plastic before they arrived.